My next question is about emotions. So Idris Shah suggests that people watch their emotional ebb and flow so that they can operate it and not it operate them. How do you suggest someone goes about watching or coming to understand their emotional ebb and flow?
By careful observation with a calm mind. Oh, and by the way, getting excited about anything really doesn't help any of these processes, right? And there's a saying that, the spoils of war are lost in the celebration. And this is one of the other caveats they give to, to people who awaken and think that that's the end of it, right? Because you get all celebratory because you've arrived, or whatever they say these days, and you're missing the part of dealing with the aftermath, right, in a constructive way. And you can go very, very destructive, and you see this all the time in fake teachers, fake gurus, all kinds of things like that. But in terms of identifying the ebbs and flows of your emotion, that just means being conscious and realizing that your thoughts are different. First, you separate your observing faculty from your thoughts, and you realize, hey, I'm not my thoughts. Those are just there, right? And where they come from and where they go is something for everyone to look at, right? And the same thing with emotions. Where do emotions come from? How often do they come? Is there a particular flavor that's predominant during a particular phase of your life or something like that? And then you watch them and you say, well, wait a minute, does it come from my body or does it come from my thoughts? And these kinds of questions, the reason they're given as questions is because teachers know that if you're not observing for yourself, you're not learning anything. And so they talk about the materials, the books, and things like that you need to read in order to get background basic information, which saves you decades of time. And then the practices, and this is one of the practices, is being conscious. And at first, you're like I said, you make that separation between your mind and yourself. And then once you've done that, then you can observe your emotions the same way you observe your thoughts. And then after you've done that, you can start to contemplate, well, wait a minute, where are these things coming from? And all of this is increasing your capacity to observe. And that sensitivity, that capability, that faculty is invaluable in life in general, right? And so rather than be the slave of whatever emotion happens to come up, anger, fear, irritation, whatever, you start to become the master of it because you understand it. And it just like in the beginning, people, they start out and the reason they start on this path, many of them, is because they're suffering from their mind. And so once you've liberated yourself from your mind and you're no longer, the slave of your mind, which is, by the way, not just your mind, there's a collective unconscious, and it's extremely powerful, and it's very much operant, and it needs to be noticed, and it needs to be thought about, contemplated. Once you're free from that, then you can observe other more subtle things. And so it's a process of increasing your capacity to observe more and more subtle things, which is very, very useful. I mean, period, full stop.
When you say master of your emotions, is that just not letting an emotion pop up and affect you? Is that not feeling? Some people would be
no,
concerned.
Because if you stopped it, it wouldn't be an emotion, and also that's very unhealthy. Basic psychoanalysis. If you repress emotion, it's just going to come up somewhere else. You're going to act it out, or you're going to displace it to somebody or something else. And so, no, you don't. None of this is repression. None of this is like forced. this is the difference between power and force in Hawkins' language. Dr. Stephen Hawkins. Is that his first name, Stephen?
Richard. I think it's Richard.
Richard Hawkins. And so you don't use force ever in any of this work. And so, no, you do not want, by all means, you do not want to repress emotions, and you don't want to repress thoughts in the usual sense of repression. Because all it's going to do, again, in psychoanalytic terms, is just going to build up pressure. And that pressure is not good for anything. It's just like waste energy that's building up, but it's not discharged, so you don't want to do that. I mean, there may be exceptions, and everything has to be individualized, but in general, I think what I'm saying is accurate for 99% of people.
I'm curious about a specific emotion then, humor. If I guess, I don't know if humor is conventionally called an emotion or not.
Is it?
I don't know. But, well, that's part of my question. From a neuroscientist or psych perspective, what do we understand as being humor? What is humor?
Well, that's a great topic. One that I've recommended to many people to study for a graduate thesis or something like that. There's some things that we do know it needs to be studied more scientifically. But the question is a very good one. There are elements of humor that have to do with the release of tension that's built up in the process of telling the joke. And that's pretty obvious. But let me use humor as an example. We use the word humor and the word emotion as both examples of why in the Tao Te Ching it says names can be given but not permanent labels, which is another way of saying words are never the thing, right? So even the word emotion is too limited, and the word humor is equally too limited. And so you have to, and this is the other capacity that has to be developed. You have to be able to see beyond the words. And I think that's what Doja was pointing to when he was saying see beyond the. Does he say words or thoughts? I don't remember. What did he say?
You should stop the intellectual practice of pursuing words.
Yeah, so stop. So this is a good example. So instead of the intellectual practice of like studying humor, okay, well, what do we know? What is the data? What is the statistics? And what do we know about people and unconscious? What's the German word for enjoying the stuff? Schadenfreude, right? Skip all that stuff and instead look at humor in yourself as you're enjoying it, as you're watching it, or as you're observing it, or as you're feeling it. And the same thing with emotions. The words are not going to help you. Now, what the books will do is help you understand why it's important to look at things directly. Direct perception, right? Direct observation. That's where the action is. It's not in dissecting the words, ad infinitum. And so, that's a good example of why we can't use words for some things. Now, if you're an academic, and you're going to study it for a thesis, your PhD or something, that's different. And one doesn't preclude the other. But in this enterprise, we're interested in development of the human being and her capacities.
So for example, more on the lines of the direct perception or experiencing humor as opposed to diving into the word, although I did a little bit of both. I was reading a Sufi teaching tale from Idris Shah and his Commanding Self, and then it was a rather short one, and I got to the end and it was like the conventional punchline, and I started laughing because it was funny, and then I sat there and I was like, I thought about how it was a joyous feeling and the actual feeling of it. But then I was like, why did I laugh? And I couldn't come up with a great explanation for why I had laughed.
Well, so good. That's right. So now this is the genius of the Sufi Mulla Nasrudin corpus. Is first there's the enjoyment of the joke, and it also makes it easier to remember. So think how generous that is to go through the trouble of making a teaching fun, even joyful to read, and also more memorable. And then invariably behind it is a teaching about your own mind. And most people can't see that at first, so they imagine somebody else's mind. You know, I'm not the Mulla, somebody else is the Mulla. and then you realize, oh my God, I am the Mulla. I mean, for some of them, you know. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's hilarious. It's wonderful. And so, yeah, so that's exactly right. And now you're going to have to contemplate it. And sometimes it takes months. Sometimes it takes years, depending on your particular, the defensive mechanism. Now, psychoanalysts, they'll spend, 5 years with you and charge you, tons of money to give you that same insight, right? Mm-hmm. And here you get it for next to nothing from the Mulla. But it does take practice, and it does take it does take exposure to them, the Mulla. What a guy.
So then I'm curious, there's so many things to contemplate.
Yeah. There sure
where do you even get the time in the day for like each of the teaching tales that I read, plus the Tao Te Ching or another book if I'm reading it, and the Mulla tales that are sticking in my mind, and the conventional day-to-day things. Like the other day we were talking about what is a corporation. Like, what is a corporation actually, not just throwing the word around, or contemplating other things. What is money, or what is like the value of money, or different. There's just so much. And some things you want to stay with for like a full day or 5 days or whatever. I guess the question is, what do you do when there's so much to possibly contemplate?
The first thing you do is get your priorities straight. Now, if you don't have a roof over your head and you don't have food to eat, you're not going to be able to enjoy reading some of these texts or be able to benefit from them much. So first you got to take care of basic human needs, right? Mm-hmm. Then you have to want this more than you want anything else. I mean, you actually want it more than having to go to work, frankly, but you have to go to work. So this has to be the highest priority in your life. I mean, that would be my experience personally, and my experience with other folks. It's got to be the highest priority. And secondly, you start to when you take this seriously and you start to practice it, you realize you can practice it all day. You can practice it when you're going to the grocery store. You can practice it when you're driving your car. You can practice while you're in an argument with somebody about something that you're debating between friends or whatever. So this is not. This is covered in the Avatamsaka Sutra, that everything is what they call religious practice. If you make it into that. Now, if you go down some rabbit hole or video game or some, scrolling on TikTok or whatever, you're going to lose it. I mean, I can guarantee that will happen. I mean, it would take an absolute master of the highest order to be able to do that and not, go nuts. But it's driving people nuts, and I wonder sometimes if that's not the plan, to just get people, either hooked on drugs or addicted to their screens, such that they don't care what's going on outside. And so I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I shouldn't have said plan, but I'm saying that's what's happening. We've turned ourselves over to the machines, to the A/B testing of the AIs, and people need to get ready, because these AIs, they're just getting started. They will be able to manipulate you in ways that you can't even imagine. I'm speaking now as a psychiatrist. they will manipulate you in ways you cannot even dream of. And if you're not prepared beforehand, you could easily be a walking, I don't know what to call it. What do you call an unconscious sheep? A sheep that doesn't have consciousness. You're just there, and you're just a zombie. Yeah, in philosophy they call them zombies. Yeah, or automaton or something like that. That's happening.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people out there that are deeply unconscious, and they suffer. They suffer horribly, and then they look for an escape. Party in Austin, everybody's coked out. What are they doing coked out in 2023? Or ketamine, for example, a dissociative. The drugs come and go, so on and so forth. It's not to moralize. It's just to say, hey, these are symptoms of a deeper problem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the deeper problem is a lack of meaning, and the lack of meaning comes from lack of purpose. And if you're going to have a purpose, my recommendation would be this one: self-development. Because I think nothing comes close to it. But there's other purposes too, right? So, it's not for everybody, but you got to have meaning and you got to have purpose, or you're going to, be one of the skulls on the side of the road, right?
I have one question about how you just said that you recommend self-development in this sense, what we're talking about, as a major goal or source of meaning. What do you say, and you've touched on this slightly, but it was in an hour-long format, one-on-one conversation, so it's buried in there. What do you say to people who are concerned about being, quote, selfish by focusing primarily on self-development?
I don't know anybody like that. I've never encountered anybody like that. I mean, people worry about it, but it's just a neurotic worry. Actually, it's just an ego defense. They're just trying to find some reason not to do apply themselves or to do the work. I hate to even say the word work or effort. Yeah, the ego will come up with 1,000 different reasons why you can't do it, right? If I do it, the kids in Africa will starve, or something like that. It's just the ego defending itself, because the ego doesn't want this to happen. It does not want this to happen. The ego is your master. The ego is your actually cruel master, and is all wonky too. So it does not want to give up its dominion, and the name of this game is dominion over your ego. So it's a real. I mean, as the Muslims and the Sufis put it, it's a real jihad. The real jihad, the greater jihad, which is submission to God. I think that's it, or is it? Yeah, submission to God.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it mastery of the self? It's the same thing, right?
Right.
And then the lesser jihad is war. It's a war against the self. War over the self would be the greater jihad, and the lesser jihad would be, war against enemies or whatever.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, you got a constant. That's another reason why you need a guide or a teacher or a coach or something like that, because your ego is going to play the most incredible tricks you could believe. You wouldn't believe some of the tricks the ego comes up with. I was a psychiatrist all my life, and some of the things people come up with to keep from facing themselves, it's amazing. Also, but of course, the most common one is to blame somebody else, right?
Right.
And you see that all the time with people who are insecure or feeling inadequate. The way they deal with that is by blaming somebody else. They call them a racist, or call them of whatever they call them. Blame somebody else. Whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's about one of the most. That's called projection of unconscious material. So you can't confront them on this. They won't have nothing of it. So these are just ego mechanisms of defense, which is something that probably should be incorporated into the Dharma, and maybe that's something I should think about. because there's, although the Sufis are way, way, way far advanced relative to Western psychology, there's no comparison. The Western psychologists do have something to contribute, and that would be the findings in psychoanalysis of the ego, the mechanism of defense.
I think that would be helpful, because I personally many times have run into the I'm being selfish one, like I should be going and doing something out in the world that helps people, and have not recognized it in the past as an ego defense. It's always been like, oh, that's actually, why am I being this way? It's been a powerful rationalization.
Until you know what you're doing, it's a mistake. And so I've been very subjected to that particular defense and acted out on it. And I'm not saying that I regret it, but I am saying that I could have. The best thing you can do for this world is to elevate your consciousness. There's no question. Nothing even comes close, because remember, there is a noosphere. There is a collective unconscious. There is let's use the word mental for lack of a better word, envelope to this planet, right? And to a town or a city or a house or whatever. You can feel it when you're more sensitive. You can feel the energy in a house, and you can see how someone can walk in and change it, right? And I don't want to use the word energy. That's wrong too. But so what I'm trying to say is that when you elevate your consciousness, you're helping everybody around you. And not just, since we're in the non-local universe, right? Locality is gone, man. Locality's out the window. So there are ways in which this helps everybody. And that's the best thing a person can do for themselves and everybody else, because frankly, they are everybody else as everybody else is them. And in the mind, the way that's reflected is through the impact of the ambient societal culture on the mentation of the person. People are preoccupied with what the culture tells them to be preoccupied with, either overtly or covertly. And if you're not aware of this, then you're not even the master of your own mind, right? Or your emotions. And we see this acted out all over the place. So, yeah, I wouldn't worry. Yeah, that's just an ego defense.
What these last things you've been saying relate to what you said before, that it would be a good contemplation, this collective unconscious thing. Do you have anything else to say about that? What are people contemplating there?
No, I wouldn't recommend that as a contemplation per se.
Oh, okay.
It's as you become more sensitive, you'll be aware that some of your thoughts don't come from you. As a matter of fact, a lot of them don't come from you. And then you start to recognize, you become more sensitive. These require capacities, right? Hidden capacities until they're uncovered.
Right.
And then you start to be able to sense them and to recognize them. And so, it's like asking an ape to appreciate a Rothko, or even the Mona Lisa. The ape's going to have to develop some new capacities, right?
Yeah.
And we are apes, and we need to develop more of our latent capacities, or for one thing, we suffer unnecessarily all the time. And secondly, we go around and we hurt each other all the time. And what you'll learn at the end, of course, or not even at the end, that what Jesus said is absolutely, it's not metaphorical. Treat your neighbor as yourself, right? Or what you do unto the least of these, you do unto me. He knows that. He knows that you are the other, and the other. That's just the way things are. You can't get around that. But that's a fairly high level to understand it fully. It requires more capacity than most people generally have. They can think about it theoretically, but until you've experienced it, you don't know it with a capital K.
My next question is from Idris Shah's Commanding Self. Idris Shah is answering a question about service. And in this answer at the end, he says, how is real service learned? Not from people who merely propagate mechanical or emotional service, which are in fact servitude. And then he moves on to say, it is learned only from such people as can see why, where, and what service of an individual and a group does, can, and should mean in any given situation, such situations being seen as a part of the whole of the human evolutionary situation. The question is, how can one learn service from someone who knows what real service is?
Ask him. For one thing, I remember once I wanted to start an orphanage, not an orphanage, a school for boys, right? Because there were so many kids in juvenile hall. And a lot of them are orphans, frankly, or effectively orphans. And my teacher basically said something about me that I won't repeat, but that I shouldn't do that because I wasn't evolved enough, right? And I wasn't. So I told him my plans, and he said, I don't think that's a very good idea, David. I'm eternally grateful to him for that, because there were other things I needed to do, right? And I wasn't. See, people go off half-cocked, and they make mistakes, and it appears good, and they get the applause of others, and everybody looks up to them or whatever. They put their name on top of the hospital, whatever it is, or they put their name on the little scroll bar or whatever, but that's not doing good. That's the appearance of good. Doing good is very difficult, but it's also there's lots of opportunities for it, but sometimes it doesn't look like you're doing good. It may look like you're hurting someone when you chastise them in a certain way, because they need to be chastised in that way or they can't hear it, right? And so, there are times when the Sufi stories are full of this, right? Where appearances, the appearances of this world are not this world. They are not reality. There's another reality that is reality, and it's totally different than this. In that I shouldn't say it's totally different than this, because this can be so beautiful. I mean, it's so gorgeous. And then you see love everywhere when you look. Oh, you look at the animals, right? Look at the trees. And but people imagine that they know what good is, but they don't. That's the best I can do right now. But yeah, I'd ask them.